I am standing on my gravel driveway at 6 in the morning, wearing the same oil-stained boots I have worn for 3 years, holding my daughter Lily's hand so tight I am afraid I might break it. In front of us are 3 black Cadillac Escalades, windows tinted like midnight, engines purring with a sound that costs more than my house. The doors open simultaneously, and men in suits step out, but I am not looking at them. I am looking at the woman in the middle vehicle, the one whose life I pulled from freezing water 36 hours ago, the billionaire CEO who is about to change everything I thought I knew about gratitude, pride, and what it really means to be rich. But before I tell you how 3 Cadillacs showed up at a broke mechanic's house in the middle of nowhere, Michigan, before I tell you about the woman who taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, and before I show you why my daughter looked up at me that morning and asked if we were finally safe, I need to take you back to the moment when I thought my biggest problem was whether I could afford peanut butter for the week. My name is Ethan Cole, and 3 days ago, I was invisible. The Lake Michigan wind cuts through you in late October like it has a personal vendetta. I was standing on the old pier behind my auto shop, the one that juts out into the gray water like a finger pointing toward Canada, holding a fishing rod that had seen better days. The shop was failing. That is not a metaphor. The bank had left 3 voicemails that morning, the kind of voicemails that do not use words like tomorrow or maybe. They use words like foreclosure and 30 days. I was 34 years old, a widower of 4 years, raising an 8-year-old daughter in a 2-bedroom farmhouse that smelled like motor oil and grief. Lily was inside, doing her math homework at the reception desk because we could not afford after-school care anymore. She had her mother's eyes, brown and wide, and always looking for the best in people, even when the best was hiding. Especially when the best was hiding in me. The sky that afternoon had been the color of slate, heavy with a storm the weather apps had promised would stay offshore. I was not fishing for fish. I was fishing for silence. When you are a single parent drowning in debt and memories, silence is the most expensive thing you can buy, and Lake Michigan sometimes offers it on credit. Then I heard the engine. It did not sound right. I have worked on engines since I was 12, and I can tell you the song of a healthy V8 from a dying one the way a mother knows her baby's cry. This was a jet engine, high and whining, cutting in and out. I looked up, and there it was, a private Learjet, maybe 60 feet long, silver and sleek, flying too low and listing to the left. Smoke trailed from the right engine. It was coming down, and it was coming down fast. I dropped the rod. I did not think about the fact that I cannot swim well. I did not think about the 40-degree water or the fact that I had Lily inside waiting for me. I thought about the last time I had failed to save someone I loved, how my wife had looked at me in the hospital bed, how her hand had gone cold in mine while the doctors said there was nothing anyone could do. I was not going to stand on that pier and watch someone else die. The plane hit the water 200 yards out, skipping like a stone, tearing a white scar across the dark lake. The sound was not like the movies. It was a wet, heavy crunch, metal screaming against water, and then silence except for the hissing of steam. I was already running, stripping off my jacket, kicking off my boots. I hit the water, and the cold punched every thought out of my head. It was like diving into knives. My muscles seized, my breath stopped, but I kept swimming because I could see the fuselage, and I could see the door, and I could see a hand beating against the glass from the inside. When I reached the plane, it was already listing starboard, taking on water fast. The door was jammed, bent from impact. I grabbed the emergency handle and pulled with everything I had, feeling something tear in my shoulder, not caring. The door gave with a shriek, and water rushed in, but I reached inside and grabbed the first thing I felt, which was an arm, slender and cold, attached to a woman in a business suit that probably cost more than my truck. She was not the only one inside. There was a pilot in the cockpit, unconscious, blood on his forehead. The woman, who I would later learn was Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies, worth $2.4 billion and featured last month on the cover of Forbes with the headline "The Ice Queen Cometh," was screaming at me to get the pilot first. Her makeup was running. Her hair was plastered to her face, and she was pushing me toward the front of the cabin even as the water rose to her waist. I made 2 trips. I do not know how. The cold was stealing my coordination, making my fingers useless claws. The first trip, I dragged the pilot, a heavy man named Marcus, to the surface and onto the floating debris. The second trip, I went back for her. By then the cabin was almost full, and she was submerged up to her chest, trapped by a seatbelt that had jammed. I dove under, fighting the buoyancy of my own lungs, and found the release mechanism with numb fingers. When I pulled her free, she clung to me with a desperation that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with being human. We made it to the pier as the storm finally broke. I do not remember pulling myself out. I remember Sarah Chun, my neighbor and the town's part-time EMT, arriving because she had seen the plane go down from the highway. I remember her wrapping blankets around us, her voice steady and calm, the way it had been when she sat with me through my wife's funeral, the way it had been every time I had tried to push her away because I thought grief was a full-time job. I remember Victoria Ashford, this billionaire in a $1,000 blazer that was now seaweed and lake water, shivering so hard her teeth sounded like castanets, staring at me with eyes that were not arrogant anymore, just scared and grateful and shockingly young. We got them to my house because the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away and the storm had knocked a tree across the main road. Sarah stabilized the pilot, who had a concussion but would live. Victoria had hypothermia and a sprained wrist. I had mild hypothermia and a shoulder that felt like ground glass, but I was moving on adrenaline and the habit of not having time to be injured. My house was warm because I keep the wood stove burning. It smelled like the apple pie Lily had made the night before, her first attempt, heavy on the cinnamon because she knows I like it that way. Victoria sat on my Goodwill couch, wrapped in a quilt my mother had made before she died, drinking coffee from a mug that said "World's Okayest Dad," and she looked around the room with an expression I could not read. Was it pity? Judgment? I did not care. I was counting the pills in the medicine cabinet, calculating if I had enough ibuprofen to get through the night. Lily came out of her room in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and saw the strange woman on the couch. Children have a radar for authenticity. They do not care about your net worth. They care about your frequency. Lily walked right up to Victoria, who was shivering despite 3 blankets, and placed her small hand on Victoria's cheek. "You are very cold," Lily said. "My daddy saved you." Victoria's eyes, which I had seen on magazine covers described as steely and calculating, filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak, and Lily climbed onto the couch beside her and showed her how to hold the mug with both hands to warm them. That was when I saw it, the crack in the armor. This woman who commanded boardrooms and destroyed competitors for breakfast was letting an 8-year-old girl teach her how to hold coffee, and she was grateful for the lesson. Sarah stayed until midnight, monitoring vitals, making sure the pilot was stable. She had brought her medical kit, but she had also brought soup, because Sarah always knew that healing happened with food as much as with medicine. She and I stood in the kitchen while the storm raged outside, washing dishes in a silence that was not awkward anymore, just full. "You cannot keep doing this," she said quietly, "pretending you are an island." "I am not an island," I said, drying a plate. "I am a peninsula, barely attached." She laughed, that soft sound that had been missing from my life, and touched my shoulder, the good one. "You saved 2 people today, Ethan. When are you going to let someone save you?" I did not have an answer then. I thought she was talking about the bank, or the shop, or the loneliness that had become my roommate. I did not know she was talking about tomorrow. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of engines. Not the distressed whine of a failing jet, but the deep, arrogant rumble of American luxury. I looked out the window, and there they were. 3 Cadillac Escalades, black as hearses, parked in my driveway like they had always belonged there. Even though the last vehicle I had worked on in that driveway was a 1998 Honda Civic with a transmission full of sawdust and prayers. I pulled on my jeans and my flannel shirt, the one with the torn pocket, and walked out with Lily trailing behind me, her hair in a messy braid I had attempted that morning. The middle door opened, and Victoria Ashford stepped out, but she was not the same woman from the plane. She was wearing jeans, actual denim, and a sweater that looked soft, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like a human being. She looked like someone I might have gone to high school with, if my high school had been populated by Greek statues who had learned to look vulnerable. "Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was different too. Not the clipped command I had heard her use on the phone when she called her assistant from my landline, but softer. "Ethan, I owe you everything." "You do not owe me anything," I said. "I would have done it for anyone." "I know," she said. "That is why I am here." The first Cadillac was full of lawyers and paperwork. The second was full of medical personnel, a mobile clinic she had brought to check on me and Lily, because she had noticed the cough Lily had, the one I could not afford to have checked by a specialist. The third Cadillac was empty, except for a man in a suit who stood by the door with his hands clasped, looking like he was waiting to deliver a verdict. Victoria walked up to me, and in front of her entourage, in front of the lawyers and the doctors and the man in the third car, she handed me a check. I did not look at the amount. I did not need to. I could tell by the way the paper felt expensive that it would solve every problem I had. It would save the shop. It would pay for Lily's college. It would buy us a new house, one without drafts and leaking pipes. Take it, Victoria said. Please. It is not enough. It will never be enough. But take it. I looked at the check. I looked at Lily, who was watching me with those eyes that saw everything. I looked at Sarah, who had walked over from her house when she heard the commotion, standing by the fence with her arms crossed, not judging, just witnessing. No, I said. The word fell into the morning air like a stone into still water. The lawyers shifted. The doctors looked confused. Victoria looked like I had slapped her. I cannot take it, I said. Not because I do not need it. God knows I need it. But because if I take this, then yesterday was a transaction. And yesterday was not a transaction. Yesterday was me being a decent human being, and you being alive. If I take this, you get to feel like we are even. We are not even. You are alive. That is the only payment I need. Victoria stared at me for a long time. The wind blew across the lake, carrying the smell of snow. Then she did something I did not expect. She tore the check in half. Then she tore it again. The pieces fell onto my gravel driveway like confetti. You are right, she said. I have spent 20 years buying my way out of feeling things. I do not want to buy my way out of this. She turned to the man in the third Cadillac, the one who had been waiting. James, she said, bring the other proposal. James, who turned out to be her chief operating officer, brought out a different folder. Not a check. A partnership agreement. Victoria had spent the night, not sleeping in the guest room I had offered her, but researching. She had found out about my shop, about my reputation for honesty in a county full of crooked mechanics, about the custom restoration work I did on classic cars that I sold to keep the lights on. She had a proposition. Ashford Technologies was developing an electric vehicle division, but they had no soul. They had engineers, but they did not have craftsmen. She wanted to open a facility in our town, not a factory, but a workshop. A place where the old ways of building things by hand, with care, could meet the new technology. She wanted me to run it. Not as an employee, as a partner. She would front the capital. I would front the integrity. And there is one condition, she said, looking at Lily, who had climbed onto the porch swing. 10% of all profits go to a foundation for widowed parents. For people who are drowning in silence. So they can afford to buy peanut butter. So they can take their daughters to the doctor. So they do not have to be heroes every single day. I felt Sarah step up beside me. She put her hand in mine, and I let. The challenges did not end that morning. The media found out, because of course they did. For a week, my driveway was full of news vans instead of Cadillacs. They wanted the story of the billionaire and the blue-collar savior. They wanted to make it into a fairy tale with a simple moral about rich and poor. But Victoria and I refused to give them that narrative. We gave them the truth instead. We talked about the widening gap between those who have and those who have not, about the dignity of work, about how saving a life should not require a reward, but how receiving help should not require shame. There was jealousy in town. People who had ignored me for years suddenly wanted to know why the billionaire had chosen me. Why not them? What made me so special? The bank that had been threatening foreclosure suddenly wanted to offer me a loan, now that I had collateral. I took the loan, but only to pay off the immediate debts, and then I paid it back within the year. I did not want to owe anyone anything, not because of pride, but because I wanted to start clean. The biggest challenge came 3 months later, when Lily got sick. Really sick. Not the cough, but something in her blood, something that required specialists in Chicago, something that would have bankrupted me a year before. But now we had the foundation. Now we had Victoria, who did not offer to pay for everything, because she knew I would say no, but who used her influence to get us appointments with doctors who had waiting lists 6 months long. She got us in within a week. And Sarah was there, every night, holding my hand in the hospital waiting room, reminding me to breathe, reminding me that I did not have to be strong alone. Lily recovered. It was not easy, and it was not quick, but she recovered. And when she came home from the hospital, there was a new swing set in the backyard, built by the mechanics who would become my team at the new workshop. There was a sign on the front lawn, not for a business, but for a home. Welcome back, Lily. We missed you. Victoria became family. Not the kind you were born into, but the kind you choose. She learned to fish, badly, catching nothing but sunburn and mosquito bites. She learned to change her own oil, though she had people who could do it for her. She learned that power is not about having the most, but about lifting up the least. She started a program within her company for single parents, for flexible hours, for understanding that sometimes your kid is sick, and that is more important than a quarterly report. And me? I learned to accept help. I learned that the 3 Cadillacs were not a bribe or a payment, but a symbol that someone had seen me. Really seen me. Not as a victim, not as a hero, but as a man doing his best with what he had. I learned that love does not end when someone dies. It just changes shape, becoming the memory that pushes you to save a stranger, becoming the courage to hold a new hand, becoming the wisdom to know that 3 black cars in your driveway do not change who you are unless you let them make you smaller instead of larger. Sarah and I got married on the pier where I had pulled Victoria from the water. It was a Tuesday in June, and the lake was calm and blue, nothing like the gray rage of that October day. Lily was the flower girl, dropping petals that floated on the water like tiny boats. Victoria was there, not in a suit, but in a sundress, crying unashamedly, holding Sarah's bouquet when the wind picked up. The pilot, Marcus, who had recovered fully, flew a banner overhead that said congratulations Ethan and Sarah, though he spelled my name wrong, and we laughed until our sides hurt. As for the workshop, it thrived. We built things that lasted. We hired single parents and gave them time to go to parent-teacher conferences. We taught apprentices that quality matters more than speed. And every year, on the anniversary of the crash, we closed the shop and went down to the pier, and we threw flowers into the water, not for the plane that died there, but for the life that began there, for the moment when a man who thought he had nothing left to give reached into the dark and pulled out light. So if you are watching this, and you feel like you are drowning, I want you to remember something. You are not invisible. Your struggles are not worthless. The world may not send 3 Cadillacs to your driveway, but it will send people. Let them in. Let them hold the mug with both hands. Let them teach you that you do not have to be strong alone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness is the only currency that never devalues, then please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to remember that they matter. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this, more moments of ordinary courage that deserve to be told. We are building something here, a community of people who believe that the best of us is found not in what we accumulate, but in what we are willing to risk for a stranger. My name is Ethan Cole. I am a mechanic, a father, a husband, and a friend. And 3 years ago, I jumped into freezing water because I could not bear to watch another person disappear. It was the best decision I ever made. Not because of the Cadillacs, but because it taught me that I was still alive, still capable of love, still worth saving. The water is cold, but the shore is closer than you think. Start swimming. We will meet you there.